So welcome to Talented People, partying with Jeanie and Colleen here at Jersey Talk Radio on Thursday night. Our special guest today is, Colleen, Kelly, and I love the show. We're really excited to be hosting it as we're streaming live. And our guest tonight is a very special author. His name is Scott Krass, and you're going to meet him and learn a lot about him in the next hour. His book, he's got actually 3 volumes. We're going to focus on 1 and 2 today. They're called Statesmen and Mischief Makers. Colleen, what say hello to everybody. And
hello,
what are you
everybody,
thinking?
And hello, Scott. So
Hi.
nice to have you here.
Pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
We're going to learn a lot about politicians. That some of them are unknown, correct?
Yeah, I hope to change that,
In
but
these
absolutely.
books. Yeah, I've learned a lot since I've started reading the book, and I can't wait to read the next one.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Well, it's kind of funny. Tonight is such a big night in the election year as it is.
It is.
Like it's all over the news tonight. Everybody's watching, and Donald Trump's not going, and this is a big deal. So we're like, hey, who needs that? Let's talk about this. And you know how they're talking all day long about each one of the contenders or running mates or whatever you want to call them, competitors, are all going to get their spot tonight. They're like minute without any.
Moment in the sun. Yeah.
Yeah. So now you're going to tell us about how you did this for all of these 150 stories in each of the different books.
When people could be proud of their politicians, I think. Right?
Yeah.
When you think about it. But, I just came to me with an epiphany. I was doing a website, writing a couple of different articles on political figures, just stories that I think people would get a kick out of, that would provide entertainment, dinner stories, etc. And then it just got to be so overwhelming. I was doing so many that I just said to myself, you know what, I'm going to turn this into a book. And I kept going and going. I think I described this to you yesterday. It's like I compared it to getting on a train at a stop where there are no passengers, there are only a few passengers. And then when you stop at each station, you pick up a little more people and then a couple more people. Then finally, by the time the train rolls into the last station, you have almost a full caboose, a full train. And that's the way I felt. I came across one person in my research intending just to write about that person, and I found 2 or 3 more, and I've they've made a contribution to history. I've got to cover them as well.
That's a journey you've been on. And how did you what made you decide to how did you get interested in politics to begin with?
Well, to begin with, that's a long way back, but it goes back to the time I was 5.
So
my mother, now I'm into congressional politics, but I was always a presidential guy. Everything there was to know about the presidents, their wives, their kids, and not so much their accomplishments in those days. I just liked reading about them. And it started when my mother, at the age of 5, gave me a president's book. One day when I came home from kindergarten, it came in the mail, and we just looked through.
In the mail?
We just looked through something, UPS, or it came.
Right.
We just looked through
So
each
cute.
and every package, or chapter rather. And my mother tells me that I wore it out so much that she literally had to buy me another one.
Wow, isn't
At
that
the-
interesting?
I just think that's
so.
so
At
special.
5 years
Age of
old,
5.
you were interested in politics and learning about.
That was
all
his
of the
first
presidents.
word.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it could have been president, right? Yeah,
That's great.
5.
that's right.
And I mean, honestly, you could just picture just everybody else would be like, oh, I want to read Dora the Explorer or whatever. You're like, oh, I want to read about the presidents. And then it's like a page turner and your mom's watching you. And like you said, you just continued from there. And that was in your whole life, you wanted to write about politics or what? You went to school for communications and political science?
Politics was always my first love, I'd say. I was always interested in presidents. Then gradually, I think it was after the '88 conventions, another election year, I turned
Top of my
the
mind.
attention. Yeah, I mean, this is the right time, but I turned to well, you thought I was going to say the '84 elections, right? That's how. But I just turned my attention to Congress and then the congressional figures there, and I just started getting into their stories. Who votes right. I won't say which party because we're nonpartisan, so to speak. But right. I got into their voting records, who I wanted to see elected, reelected, who I thought was vulnerable, who I thought would be defeated, and that was always something that became my next passion. Elections. I mean, I was like a kid. During Christmas time, waiting for the presents, waiting for Election Day. That was always my holiday.
Well, you must be excited
Election
this
Day,
year,
better
yeah. Well,
than
I haven't
Christmas.
had time to get into it yet. I've been so busy with that. But, well, I brought you a little present. I'm not sure. I guess this is the time, but a little coloring slash president's book.
Oh.
Yeah.
So this is the book that
from
started
your mother.
it all,
Straight from
right?
Madeline Mandel. So,
From your mom, Madeline. And look, everyone, this is the original copy,
The original
I believe,
copy.
right? And it's hardcover.
Yeah.
The presidents.
Some kids were drawing. You wasn't not to leave out. I mean, I drew all over Mamie Eisenhower's face, but other than that, yeah.
Honestly,
It's
can
just
you
a
imagine?
beautiful-
Like your mom must feel so rewarded that this book that she gave you at 5 years old has created you into the author of
has just
3
impacted my life.
massive-
Literally, it's not an exaggeration.
No,
Right.
yeah.
Is your mother as involved in politics as you? Or?
No, she's a teacher, a retired teacher, but that was her pride and joy.
Oh my gosh.
She's so bad she could handle.
Let's
a
give a
class of
toast to your mom
43.
here. Toast.
Absolutely,
Okay.
to many more
Partying
years.
and toasting
Yes.
in sincere honor of
here.
your mother,
Yes,
Madeline.
thank you
That's
so
so
much.
cool.
Yeah.
Scott, yeah, so I have to kind of feel the pages for a second
Of
because
course.
the history is ridiculous of not only the book but your story here. It's like, oh my God, I think you said it was like,
That's a nice book.
look at
That's
it,
a lot of
right,
great-
and you've preserved it well. I love
Just
the
to
way
show
it's
you how things have changed. I used to want to be in that
Wow.
book, but now I think I'll just stick to
be on
doing
the
commentary
internet.
about them.
wow.
Yeah.
You can feel the ink on the pages and everything. So. What a treat! Look, it's dated 1979.
Yeah.
Everybody,
Yeah.
and look, oh,
So it only goes up
to
to Carter.
Scott, I love you, mommy.
Yeah,
That's-
And then you've got
exactly
you writing presidents backwards.
right.
I
That, but
love it, precious.
Yep.
Wow! And you said your mother had to buy you another one
That's
after
what
you
she
wore this
said.
one out.
Yeah, she said
That is just the greatest,
turning the pages
greatest
so much
story.
wore it
So
out.
let's get to the books a
Yeah,
little bit.
Sure.
go ahead.
And could
Love
you tell
it.
us a little bit what the books are about? I know they're about congressmen and senators.
That's exactly right. The first volume is really devoted to some of the more household name politicians, but I always explain it that even though you might recognize a name like Hubert Humphrey and Tip O'Neill and Everett Dirksen and Jacob Javits, you don't, excuse me,
Wow.
you wouldn't necessarily know what they're all about, what they've accomplished, how they made America great, what their stories are, their legacies, and that's really what I wanted to try to get across to everybody. Volume 2 is more about unknown figures, obscure figures, but people with great stories, great after-dinner tidbits, and people who really just had a lot of influence as well, but more behind the scenes. Not to say that their impact wasn't behind the scenes, but they sometimes weren't always in the front pages of the newspapers, and that's the way they liked it. But the main thing is they got things done.
How did you gather your information on all these people? Because this is a very big book. With
It started out on the internet, just looking at facts, just obituaries, stories, books. I'd always be led to biographies. I was amazed at how many of my subjects, as I call them, have biographies, even some of the most obscure ones, memoirs, etc. But it then transformed a little bit to my having to contact a lot of the family members, and occasionally some of them themselves. There's a guy by the name of Dick Clark, not the entertainer, but a senator. That makes a tidbit in itself, but senator.
I was probably
he was a
confused
senator
by
from
all of
Iowa. Richard Clark. People used to call his office asking if he was the Dick Clark from American Bandstand.
Really?
But as a prank. But I would end up having to contact them just to get photos or photo permissions, and that would lead to one story after another. And I used the term amplify yesterday. I mean, I don't think my chapters could have been as effective as they are without having talked to the family members, because they gave me so much inside information, things
Right.
that you'd never know.
Well, I want to ask a couple questions. One is that, again, the period of time for the volume 1 is between, it's like JFK and Reagan.
Yes,
correct?
1960 to 1988.
And how many stories or how many features, or you call them
Subjects.
subjects? Yeah.
The volume 1 has probably about 125 or so. There are a couple, some chapters have multiple figures. If I'm covering, like, say, the Abscam scandal, that had about 6 or 7 Congress people and senators. Volume 2, that's the big one. That probably has, let's see, it has about 160 chapters. So if you add in the fact that some have multiple, maybe about 180, 185 figures. And Volume 3, which will be out sometime in the spring, is devoted exclusively to chief executives, either mayors or governors.
Wow.
Isn't that something?
No, it really is. And I'm like, okay, so we want to hear some stories.
Yeah.
Like, okay, you mentioned Jacob Javits. I know you got some good stories on, like, your most special person, but I also think it's really cool because of the consideration that he's given to not leaving someone out.
Right.
Like, what I love when I'm talking to you, it's like amazing. While he's writing the books, you're going through every single person. You want to make sure everything's covered. And then you're like, oh, I forgot someone. No, we're not going to press till I go back. Tell about that. And then also really get into the heart of how you had to knock on these families' doors by reading their obituaries to find the people without cell phones, wrong numbers, to research your book.
Yeah, everything you mentioned, all of the above, could be excruciating. First of all, to mention...
That's what we love about you. You're just so dedicated to the cause.
Yeah, well, to start out with just adding the chapters and not being able to leave anybody out and not being able to stop myself, I thought I was all but done. I was getting all ready to turn the book in. And then I was touching up one last subject, and I came across the congressional record, and he thanked another one of his colleagues, a guy by the name of Gene Keogh of New York, from Queens, from Brooklyn, actually, who presided over the Civil Rights Act in the House, over the debate. And I said to myself, that's history. I mean, I could leave it out, but there would be a major gap if I left out a true footnote to history. How many people get to say that they presided over the debate in the House chamber during the House of Representatives for 10 hours? So there I go, back to the library, back to the stacks, looking up information on Gene Keogh, who until 10 minutes ago I had never heard of.
And then you were getting the information and you added him in the book?
I certainly did,
Yeah, he was not going to leave the history behind.
And I made a place for him.
That.
Yeah, and then came, you think the writing was the easy part, and it absolutely was. But then came down to acquiring permission for the photos.
Oh, and they're tremendous.
I was going to say, I could write a book about how not to write a book, because it just went, and it's still going on as I pursue volume 3, but I'm coming down to the end now, nearing the finish line.
I don't think most people would be as diligent as you.
There's no chance. We've seen a lot of authors, and they're awesome, but their books aren't this long, and they don't, they have to cut things.
I had already put the pictures
long,
in.
But
So.
they're all
short
broken
stories.
out to these short stories, and they're very well written and very humorous, and they tell, you feel like you get to know the people that you're reading about, which is what you want when you're reading a book.
And also what the word is you use is the amplify, where that you kind of had like a wind of the story. You wanted to get to know more. You went back to the family, and then you cut to get their side of the story.
I'd always put the basics on paper just to relieve my own anxiety. And so the fact that I'd have something if all else failed. So just basic from start to finish. And that's really where obituaries and biographies came in. But then I could go to the families and say, why don't you tell me your side? I mean, this might have been an unpopular decision, but what was he thinking? You know, what was?
Well, give us an example of that, because those are the kinds of things that are in the book that make it so special.
Yeah. Well, I guess one of them would have to be Gail McGee. He was a senator from Wyoming, and he was an obscure senator, and he just liked it. He loved it that way. But he was really a foreign affairs guru. In fact, with the exception of maybe one or two other people, his expertise on foreign affairs was just second to none. And he was from the state of Wyoming. He was a professor. And these are the kinds of things you learn from families. He was so gifted as a professor at the University of Wyoming. His speaking style was just so voracious and just so wondrous that people would be lining up in the rafters to get an entry to his class. So when he went to Washington, he really became well versed on foreign affairs. And Robert Byrd, the powerful Senate Majority Leader, said that one of the speeches that he had given in 1967, I think it was on Vietnam, ranks as absolutely the top 100 speeches in the United States. But not only that, I mean, Gail McGee, he used to get he was anti-Joe McCarthy, and he gained his recognition talking to students about him, about the anti-witching of people. And it was to the point that his kids, and I spoke to his son Robert, I had developed a wonderful relationship with him. He said his family would used to get hate mail in the small state of Wyoming, small rural town. They'd get hate mail about that. But just leading to my point about the things you don't know, I once said to him, well, Gail McGee is not somebody you associate with foreign policy knowledge. There are people in that era such as Wayne Morse, Bill Fulbright, whom I covered incidentally. I said, why is that? And he said, well, you have to understand, Gail McGee was never about the headlines. He was just about doing right for Wyoming and his constituent. And that's really something, but yet every president could appreciate his counsel. And it turns out that LBJ actually considered having him as the Secretary of State. He wasn't interested, but he also thought about asking Gail McGee to run his presidential library when he opened it. So it's things like that you wouldn't read in the books, and you
get that right from the family member, and like
yes.
you said, then you became really close with the family member, right? Because
Is that speech that he gave somewhere on,
We could absolutely
recorded?
find it. Yes.
Yes.
I don't think it's recorded because the Senate didn't have cameras. There was no C-SPAN in those days.
Right,
but
I know.
the transcript would certainly be available in the congressional record. I'm sure about that.
I think that when you're talking, and I was just, you were describing, and I was visualizing what you were saying about how the everybody's packed in line to get in to listen to what he was going to say. I honestly want to talk about your speaking because I believe that a lot of people out here absolutely need to know that you are interested in speaking. You want to make sure that people can hear your messages, learn about this history that you have. And again, it's in your head, so it's entertaining because you're so funny. And you know the family members and you know the history. And also just the fact that you
should be going around to all the colleges.
That's my plan.
Yeah, that's what
I've actually sent emails to some of the professors of chair people.
Well, I think a lot of people out there watching know people.
Yep.
Yeah. And even the studio manager here, our founder of Jersey Talk Radio, co-founder Bruce Pearson's listening in and saying, "Wow, I've got someone I want to introduce you to," and that's where it goes to. That. We need to have that, right? Because the more people, because that's how he is.
I don't even know about some of these people, and that was my era. I know some of the big names that you mentioned earlier, but to learn about these people and history and what why they decided to go into politics or what drove them is very interesting, and I don't think people really.
Well, now, and if you didn't stop, drop, and write the book and bring it back, so it is in history now form. You mentioned.
I devoted a nice section to presidential campaigns.
It's nice that you devoted this.
Oh gosh.
So that's
book
timely.
Too.
But I also love. It was interesting. Like when the more that I've had you with Colleen on the radio and television and so on, you mentioned again yesterday something about Wyoming. Tell us about how interesting just your writing has brought you back to Wyoming so many times.
Wyoming's the least populated state in the Union, but I think I've had more subjects from that state than virtually any others, with the exception of New York and California, which are so huge, of course. Wyoming, there were at least 2 governors. One of the proudest moments of my, or anecdotes of my writing this book is having had a U.S. senator literally edit my chapter on his father. Al Simpson, he was and still is. He's a prominent politician from Wyoming. He was head of the Simpson Bowles Committee in Washington. He said it would have been named Bowles Simpson, but in Washington you never want to have a committee with the initials BS. But that aside, though, he was a senator from Wyoming for 18 years, but his father was governor and senator from the state of Wyoming, Millward Simpson. Just a total salt-of-the-earth man, total integrity. And I covered him. Al was gracious enough to give me a beautiful photograph of he and his father hunting when Al was 17, and the inscription was "Pop beat me." I never thought I'd let him get in a couple extra shots, but he beat me. So things like that. But there was Gail McGee. There's Cliff Hansen. We talked about that yesterday. A couple of other people from Wyoming.
What about what is it? I'm sorry. I know you got. What does it feel like to have this person in your head that you're starting to write about, and you're a writer and you're a historian, and then you meet the family through however you get to them, and then you learn their side? Do you feel like all of your subjects?
Very much so. Not as much as you could, obviously, but I mean, just in talking to their family members, there's such a sincerity and such dedication and such a want to have her story out there that I think, in my words, I can tell the people everything there is to know about them. And some of these are just wonderful stories.
And
people who should live through the ages.
Some of them are stories about mischief makers.
Absolutely, yeah.
So was it a little bit harder to get the families to tell their stories?
They were. Now, some of the mischief makers, such as Wayne Hayes, he doesn't have kin. So, I mean, I was able to get off easy and not have to contact them. But, I had one rule when I was writing this, well, a couple of them, but one rule, and that was conscience. I wasn't going to contact the family members if I was intentionally going to be making their subjects look bad. I mean, look, my job here is to tell biographies, whether it's good or bad, and that's really the whole mission statement of the book. But I couldn't, in good conscience, contact somebody's daughter and say, I want you to approve of me writing something that's not so flattering of their father, even if it's been out there time and time again. Now, there were some others that I actually gave them opportunities to clarify things about for the record, and that went over very well because some of the reactions were, see, people don't really research beyond the fine print, so they don't really know the whole stories and that they were, say, exonerated. So that helped a lot
Wow.
also. But
Right.
you know, I mean,
Wow.
that's something that really.
So who would one of those subjects be?
Well, Ed Patton, who was his honor was really second to none. He was from New Jersey. He had a district. He was part of the Will Ends machine in Middlesex County, and he got a district carved out for him in 1961. And he vowed to be a down the line supporter of JFK, and he was. But he was kind of implicated towards the end of his tenure by a certain scandal. A guy by the name of Tongson Park, who was a rice grower in California, but he was using that to influence people. How was Patton involved with that? He somehow bought tickets to the Middlesex County dinner, the Democratic dinner. He was sold that, and all of a sudden the ethics committee, that was, you have to understand, that was
Wow.
post-Watergate and just around the time Abscam was taking place, and people couldn't understand what was going on with that. It turns out that he had actually forbidden his aides to do business with Tongson Park, and he didn't have a clue that his aides were the ones who had actually sold the tickets to Tongson Park without his knowledge. So he was exonerated, and to show what a forgiving guy he is, in my language I'll use the term mensch, I asked his daughter, well, did he fire the aide? And he's like, no, he could never do that because he was a loyal employee. He made a mistake. So it's things like that that really humanize the subject.
Love that.
Right.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the Bible.
Yeah.
Like the story of forgiveness and exoneration stuff. I'm just,
That's
I mean,
dope.
seriously, those stories are forever now in these 3 volumes. So I thank you. I know Colleen does too.
Yeah.
You know, really, because that is so important for the family, like you said, and for the sake of him being so generous and forgiving. I love that. I think that's
Yeah.
great. I want to hear about Jacob Javits, just because I have no idea. I don't know anything
We always
about
go to the
We go to
Jacob
We're going to
Javits
Toy
The Javits
Fair.
Center,
It's
yeah,
like
which
We're
was
always
dedicated
there.
2 weeks away.
dedicated when he passed away in 1986.
Who is he?
He was a senator from New York, one of the most progressive Republican senators.
Okay.
He was a liberal Republican. His proudest accomplishments, I think, when he left office involuntarily, he was beaten by Al D'Amato. I think we probably know that.
Wow.
We
In
do.
Yeah.
1980 in the
Yeah.
primary. But his proudest accomplishments were civil rights, union rights, and the ERA. You don't hear too much of that about a Republican these days, but
Right.
that's the kind of person he was. He was one of the most impressive senators, but he wasn't a particularly nice person. He was actually one of the most, that's not to say he was mean, but staff did not consider him friendly. I mean, there are some wonderful people, which I will talk about, but Jacob Javits really wasn't one of them. He was dug into his work. He was a tough boss. One of his employees said that he felt like he was working for a drill sergeant when he was working for Jack Javits. And his own wife would say publicly that even when we were married, I thought we were alone. She said that when they were traveling on the train for their honeymoon,
lot of wives say that.
he actually brought newspapers along. But the accomplishments can't take away.
He brought newspapers along on the train on, their
train, yeah.
honeymoon. Oh,
But
that's funny.
the personal foibles and the personal idiosyncrasies, to say the least, can't really take away from their accomplishments. And Jack Javits was so well respected among his colleagues that one day LBJ, and this LBJ was he had no shortage of egotism, but he was in the Oval Office one day and he said to him, Jack, he pointed to his chair, with your brains, you should be the one sitting in that chair, not me.
Wow.
So that really goes to show what he's taught one term too many. He was already suffering from ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease.
Oh, really?
And unfortunately, the New York Republican Party was moving to the right, and Al D'Amato, it was just the year of the Reagan landslide. He beat him in the primary. And that was the end of Jack Javits. And he wouldn't have lived to serve his term anyway, because unfortunately the terrible disease killed him 6 years
Right.
later.
Wow.
That's so interesting.
No, it is so interesting. Even when you call him Jack.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, people called him Jack Javits.
That's
Jacob
so
is something
funny.
that, yeah.
I mean, honestly, we do go there 22 times a year, and I never knew anything about what it was named after.
Yeah.
I didn't even
Right.
realize.
So now
It's
we know.
convenient because it's right by Penn Station. So
Yeah, yep.
just get off the train there.
What about these stories are interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
So can you tell us who's one of your favorite subjects in your book?
One of the most heartwarming was another person from Wyoming. We'll just pick that state randomly, but a guy by the name of Cliff Hansen. Cliff Hansen became one of the most well-respected politicians in Wyoming. He was both governor and a U.S. senator, and he always wanted to be a politician, starting from when he was 6. We all heard the story about Barack Obama wanting to be president when he was 5. Well, Cliff Hansen, who's actually in Volume 2, wanted to be president. He wanted to be governor of Wyoming when he was 6. But there was one small, tiny, minor problem. He had a major speech impediment. So how did he get over that? His father was a ranch hand, and Cliff Hansen would just make up speeches and read them to his cows. He'd just tell the livestock his speeches and stories. And it was just incredible. He would overcome that, and he gradually make a rise into the Teton County, Wyoming government. Eventually, he became governor and senator. But what's so heartwarming about his presence, you want to talk about extremes, is as Jack Javits was not particularly well liked, Cliff Hansen was absolutely beloved.
Really?
Beloved by staff, beloved by the Capitol Hill folks. He treated them so well that even when there was a line at the Senate cafeteria, when the Capitol Hill lunch aides would realize which office a staff member of Hansen's worked for, they'd put him immediately in the front of the line and give him extra food.
Wow.
And at the end of his evening, when Cliff Hansen was getting ready to leave his office, he'd say goodnight to every single one of his staff members. And then at the last desk that he'd stop at, greeting his employee, he'd ask them if he could use his phone. And the employees would think, like, I'm really going to say no. Yeah. But he'd pick up the phone, telephone his wife, and say, I'm on my way home now, dear.
Aww. And it's a desk phone, right?
It was a desk phone in those days. He left office the year before I got my president's book,
right.
So in 78. But he would go home. They'd have a 75-year marriage. And his last words they were married when they were in their 20s.
Oh.
He was pursuing another frat brother's son from the wife, rather, or girlfriend, rather. I'm sorry. And, being from the Old West, he wasn't about to back down. He was like, I'll meet him in the parking lot at the corner at midnight. But, yeah. So, and he married, and the rest was history. And his last words when he died at the age of almost 98 was whiskey.
Oh, my
Whiskey?
God.
Yeah, and his grandfather, not me.
That's my favorite kind of version.
Just to show you what a legacy Cliff Hansen has, is Cliff Hansen's grandson is now governor of Wyoming. So they're
really?
Not me. Their political lineage in Wyoming is just super.
Have you talked to him?
No, I haven't, but I talked to Cliff Hansen's son, and he said, I enjoyed reading about your dad.
Oh,
my dad.
That's nice.
So
when you're, like, in this world, because you have, like, the funniest writing style, like you add in your kind of, I think it's just witty, but it's very courteous and funny and observational, and you're kind of like you said, in the amplifying of your book, where that you heard both from the person and from the rumors, and then you just kind of put out there what everybody else wants to hear. So
humor,
it's
always humor.
Yeah.
That's
the thing.
Hallmark anywhere.
Well, and it's also the human, qualities of people, because politicians, we kind of put them off like this, but you get to know the person, which is
that's my charisma, if you will. We'll call it crass charisma, but that's my charisma.
Crass charisma.
Crass
Not crass charisma.
I'm going to start hashtagging.
We're going to have to add another forward on a website and forward it over.
Yep.
Just so everybody knows, again, Statesmen and Mischief Makers. But Scott, tell us about some of the funny stories of the little mischief makers. A little bit of scandal. A little something.
Just a little bit of scandal. Not much. But Wayne Hayes.
Just a little.
Wayne Hayes, he served as a congressman from Ohio for 28 years. And he was so popular helping his constituents, but he was not popular on Capitol Hill because he'd even boast that he was a mean SOB. he made no bones about it. One of the ways he was able to exert his power as being a mean SOB was by being what's called the mayor of Capitol Hill. He chaired the House Administration Committee, which basically is responsible for everything from the carpeting in the Capitol Hill rooms to paychecks, which is why aides were so fearful about crossing him, because he signed everybody's paycheck. But late in his career, his undoing was a woman by the name of Elizabeth Ray. She was a model. She posed in Playboy after, although I don't think before. He hired her as his administrative secretary, but his silver lining, and this is why you really have to think about when you're doing something. That's the cover-up is worse than the crime. She even said, "I can't type, I can't file, I can't even answer the phone." But what she could do, yeah, you're hired. What she could do, and didn't hesitate to do, was perform favors for him. And I'll let you use your imagination about what those favors were.
Oh, my goodness.
But she actually did that. And she even says, I'm supposed to be on the oversight committee, but I like calling it the out-of-sight committee. But the funniest thing is when Wayne Hayes actually got remarried, she said to him, do I have to still continue to use the technical term having sex with you? And he thought for a minute, and he's like, well, we'll see if you behave yourself, whatever that meant. He gave her the phone number, I think, 555-5555. But ultimately, his undoing was drinking and rambling, and he was taking some pills, and he had to resign. But the reason he was able to stay popular for so long
he wrote the checks.
The fact, what's that? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
She wrote the checks.
Oh yeah, but that too. But because he was the politician that served somebody. When people had a problem, he'd always say, "Call my office." He's the quintessential. He performed favors for me. So whenever people had a problem, and that actually does something. It's not so easy to just dismiss somebody politically when they're there for everybody, their constituents.
Well, how long was Elizabeth Ray did she under his employ? A long time, or
it was probably a good 2 years. Mm-hmm. But then she began performing appearing for Playboy.
That was a better gig.
And a porn star, yeah, ultimately.
No, I'm just joking. But it is funny. I like what you said about the cover-up is worse than the crime.
Sometimes,
that's pretty funny. And I'm sure that your book has got so many little kind of stories about things that are wherever. People
they could get away with things a little bit easier.
It was less police in those days, but eventually they always got caught. Mm-hmm. Rarely did they not.
It's nice to know, though, that that you do get to, like you said, clarify some of the stories for people, like where you had a chance to actually hear something and mean it to the family. Like I know that you got a really fantastic testimonial from Rosemary O'Neill. She's the daughter of the former House Speaker Tip O'Neill.
Yep.
Colleen talks about all the time. We could read, but why don't you tell us the story about her?
Her name was Rosemary O'Neill, and she, I think, is the kind of daughter every parent would dream of. She's really, not only was she absolutely devoted to her parents growing up, but she keeps his legacy alive. He hasn't been with us for 20 years. His mother, his wife Millie died about 10 years after that. She still goes to Ireland to champion his legacy, and she speaks at groups around here, in America, just keeping alive his legacy. And I had been in contact with the Cambridge Library, the Cambridge room, the O'Neill room. They gave me some photos to use, but I still wanted permission to use a couple other photographs and to ask her a few questions. And I'm thinking to myself, there have to be hundreds, if not thousands, of interview requests for Tip O'Neill. How is she going to have time for little old me? She called back and was very generous with her time. And she told me stories that were out there, but I'm not really sure people know about. And Tip O'Neill was really the epitome of my whole book, of all the years behind my book, the quintessential Irish guy. He was close to Kennedy, and he sparred with Reagan. You can't get much more contemporary with my book than that. Mm-hmm. But what she told me was the story of Tip O'Neill, which I remembered very much, and that's loyalty. In 1946, John F. Kennedy was running for Congress from the Cambridge-based Massachusetts 8th Congressional District. It might have been 9 in those days, but Joe Kennedy, there were multiple candidates, about 10, and Joe Kennedy Sr. Literally was buying everybody off, peeling them away slowly from the other candidates, hoping that they'd support his son, who was 29 at the time, the future president. So Tip O'Neill was supporting another candidate, and Joe approached him, and along with Leo Deal, who became Tip O'Neill's trusted aide for 20 years after while he was Speaker. And he said to him, look, I'd like you to support somebody else. And Tip said, no, I'm supporting Mike Neville. I'd like to continue doing it that way. So Joe Kennedy, they couldn't be bought off. They weren't, he was a little bit disappointed. But JFK found out about that. And, of course, he won that primary and went to Congress. Shortly thereafter, he went to Tip O'Neill and Leo Deal, and he's like, I want you to be my allies. And Tip O'Neill said, well, sure, Jack, I'm happy to do that. And you even want to do that in light of the fact that I supported your opponent? And Jack said, that's exactly why I want to do that, because I can tell that you guys are loyal. You guys don't abandon your friends, and that's exactly what I want in a friend.
Right.
That's like so awesome.
Yeah.
And really, again, it goes back to these like you're pulling out loyalty and forgiveness and stories and
Traits.
And Tip O'Neill's mantra, of course, is that we can battle like crazy during the day, but we have to be friends again after 6. And he absolutely lived to that. You know, it was legendary. He and Ronald Reagan could be ferocious adversaries in the White House, but they get together every single St. Patrick's Day. And St. Patrick's Day is not too far away.
That's amazing.
Thinking of the corned beef and cabbage already. And,
Yeah.
But, you know, they were both Irishmen who loved to swap stories after 6.
Well, that asks a question I have. When you're talking or learning and going through this research and you see that, like, I mean, honestly, like I would think that people out there were thinking, are they really sincere when they're having that after 6 thing? Like, honestly, you must feel that this is true loyalty.
Tip O'Neill was.
And could you
Right.
see through it with other people? Like, when they were pitching the stories, could you see any kind of like, bleh?
Yeah, you have to wonder. Naturally, every child wants to make their parent look good, but you could even just by reading, it's backed up by some of the other biographies. Tip O'Neill absolutely exuded warmth and sincerity, and I don't think a single person was able to say something negative about him as a human being.
To me, that would be so rewarding writing the book and talking and getting that kind of confirmation, reaffirmation. Just like you have the story, but you're talking to these people and you don't even know them, and they're like your family member in a way. Like at least
Right.
it feels. I feel like I know these people because I've been talking with you and Colleen for the last couple
Right.
months, and it's like I can't imagine how that feels being the author.
Yeah, to everything there's a story. I learned today that we're getting ahead of ourselves because this is volume 3, but there's a governor of Virginia that I'm writing about. To everything there's a story. The phrase "Virginia is for lovers." We've all heard of that.
Right.
There's a story behind that too. That's where a king of England and Pocahontas, his bride, spent their honeymoon. They were one of the first couples to marry in Virginia and spend their honeymoon near Williamsburg. So they incorporated the phrase "Virginia is for lovers."
How about that?
See, now that is so interesting. And also, they should put the tagline in about Pocahontas because I'm a big fan of that. Too.
Yeah.
You know, I'd be more interested in knowing about the lovers and Pocahontas than her story. I didn't even know that. Yeah. Anyway.
Are you going to continue? Is the third book from the same era? Or?
It is, yes.
Okay. Are you interested in writing about current politicians at all?
Oh, at some point, maybe. I think I'm able to fulfill my affinity for explaining about the current political scene on my Twitter handle.
Right.
Which is enough right now because this keeps me so busy. But yeah, I think after I finish this book, I'd like to go into more of the non-office holders, like the staff members behind the politicians and the presidents and the people who made them famous.
Right.
That's
really
part of
interesting.
this
Story behind the story.
No,
That
right.
is.
And also, you did mention about while you were writing, there are people in the books that have made the presidents, and I know we talked a little bit about one or two of them, but is there someone in particular that you remember that you say, this person, was never recognized, but like powered by kind of thing?
There are many, many people, particularly in Volume 2, who really were the people behind key laws, key decisions. Whether it's civil rights or whether it's women's rights. I can't tell you how many chapters I've devoted to that weren't just staples of it, but pillars, absolute foundations about it. Had it not been through their tenacity, throughout were not for their bulldog-like style and for not giving up, no matter how bleak the odds seemed, things wouldn't get done. People behind key laws like aviation-related laws, public safety laws,
Give an
health
example.
laws.
Give a
guy by the name of John Fogerty from Rhode Island. There are so many health acts that he sponsored in the 1950s, 1960s. He helped create the Health, Education, and Welfare Department, other grants, and to the research grants, and to the point that there are so many facilities and buildings named for him. A guy named John Moss, he authored the Freedom of Information Act. He thought the public had the right to know.
That's amazing.
He was on a fact-finding trip to Brazil, and he'd be using the kerosene lights to plan strategy. just pioneers of women's rights. I told you the story yesterday. Bella Abzug, who's a little bit better known, of course, than most other people, but she was battling for the ERA for the longest time, and one of her main impediments was a judiciary chair and fellow New Yorker named Emanuel Seller. He was generally a liberal, but he was stuck in his own way from a different era. He was in his 80s, so he was the person battling it up. He once said that it's not where you stand, but where you sit. And the bill right now, because I'm chair of the Judiciary Committee, it's sitting foursquare underneath my fanny, and it's not going to see my light of day. But he also got kicks of reminding Bella Abzug that women were not at the Last Supper. So without missing a beat, she said, well, they might not have been at the Last Supper. We might not have been at the Last Supper, but we'll sure as hell be at the next one.
All right. I love that. I love that.
Vintage Bella. And her daughter Liz was very helpful with me.
That is so great.
Well, thank goodness for all those people.
And you
with
see the apple never falls far from the tree. Same personality, irascibility with Liz, but a wonderful person, Liz Abzug.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
Mm-hmm.
And you've got that tenacity to you.
I try to.
And,
Absolutely.
Thank goodness you do, because, you're preserving history.
And I also think it's interesting. I don't know if you see this or not, but I see it in my own, circles. You probably see it with your kids. There's a lot of interest in history and the elections and who's running and stuff, even in the younger, the 30s, the millennials and so on down. And you have this way of not being a little older, where that, I think you connect with all these audiences. I think you're funny. And so people who are listening at almost any age are just oh my God, you're giving it to me straight. Right. You're funny. You are recognizing some of those highlight moments where you just will say it, where that a lot of people would not say it.
That's a gift, and I don't always have it.
It is a gift.
But, I mean,
you have
try
it.
Thanks.
Yeah, you make me want to learn more about these people, which normally I would just be hear the name and
in my seat. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You have to consolidate and have a little bit of humor, have a little bit of seriousness, have a little stories. That's really my shtick, I think, when it comes to making an effective presentation.
Yeah, but it's kind of interesting because it's tough to be both an author and a speaker. Yes. It is. It's some people are just really good at writing and then they just don't speak as well. But your book is so funny and so important, and I love the way, Colleen and I say, that it's just, these are they should be textbooks, should be required reading, by the way, in all the libraries and research. And that at the same time, you engage them as much in the book as you do in person.
Yes.
And that's what we really love about you.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
We do.
Yeah. So we're already at 6:52, so we have about 5 minutes left.
Right.
So tell us more.
Well, what do you have? Tell us a little bit about what your plans are. When does the third book come out? Where can people get the first two books?
You can buy that off of Ex Libris, and that's with an X, Xlibris, xlibris.com. Just type in my name, Scott Crass.
And it's so reasonable. They're $23.99.
$23.99.
And you could go to your website, Statesmen and Mischief Makers, and that'll go right to Ex Libris.
That's exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. My third volume I anticipate being out by the middle of March. My goal for the rest of my life, I guess, besides promoting this and talking about this, is teaching.
That's great.
And you should be.
Yes, so I'm just reaching out to the different colleges and universities.
Well, you should be there. That's a perfect place for you to be.
And I think humor is always the best medicine, which is why for my historic quotes. If I could just tell you one historic quote.
Absolutely.
I tried to accompany, because this is classic, and that's really what I wanted to do, grab people's attentions by starting the chapter off with either a historic line or tidbit, short story, that's not even necessarily about the characters, but just that people could go away laughing about. And Harry Truman, there were rumors that he was opposing JFK when he sought the 1960 presidential nomination because he didn't think a Catholic could win. So finally, when confronted about that, somebody said to him, Mr. President, are you worried that by electing JFK, the Pope is going to be controlling decisions and running the White House? And thinking of Joseph Kennedy Sr., he just shot back without losing any, without having to think. He said, it's not the Pope I'm afraid of, it's the Pop. And it's just stories like that.
That's funny.
I think, yeah.
So you have each chapter, you start off with a little quote or
a story, a short story.
A short story.
Yeah.
So is there any politicians that have a slogan that that are interesting, that you can tell us about?
A slogan.
Yeah.
I would have to think about that. I mean, certainly there were. I mean, offhand, I'd have to really think
Right,
about what
right.
comes. I mean, well, there's Richard Robert Smiley, who's going to be. He was the governor of Idaho, so you can imagine how devoted. Following he was, so you have to elect Smiley, and they have a smiley face,
Yeah, that's
things like that. That's not the best example.
Did
though.
they
I
ever
mean,
put like a big
that's
red
good.
X over?
Yeah, no, not at all.
No, that's
As a matter
good.
of fact, one of the other governors, his name of Colorado, was Governor Love. So I put, and they were both moderate Republicans. So one of my chapters is called "The Republicans Should Really, to Get Ahead, Be the Party of."
Oh, see, there it goes again. I'm back. I love
Right.
your values. I love.
Probably about 500 photos.
That's what's great
People
about
said
it.
to
It
me, "Why
is.
don't you leave it out?" But I
Yeah.
had already
No.
written it, and I wasn't about to, or leave
No.
some of them out. Now,
Right.
a couple of them were public domain, although I still had to get permission.
Sure.
But many of them were not. So I had to contact, and this is what was so frustrating. I had to contact libraries, newspapers, only for them to tell me that even though it was in their name, that they didn't necessarily own the rights to it. Because when you find it on
Right.
the internet,
New
or
York
even,
Times could own it.
yeah, or even when a newspaper publishes it, that doesn't mean they weren't getting it from the AP or somebody else. So that was difficult in itself. Then I had to get in touch with each of the family members because Ex Libris required, in order to put the photos on the cover, and I chose a lot of them, I had to get permission from at least one family member. Now, I'm proud to say that not one of them turned me down. But
Well, it's so
finding
diligent of
them
you to go and
was-
get that.
And I had more luck, amazingly, finding family members of a subject who died 30 years ago than somebody who died about 10 months ago.
Really?
People move, numbers are disconnected. I get that, but in 10 months versus 30 years, people were in the same place as 30 years ago. Some of them.
Amazing, amazing.
Right.
Yep.
And I think that's what really adds to the book too. I'm glad that you put all the photos in there because it helps, to visually tell you tell your story.
It
and
wouldn't be
then the
effective
visuals of
without it. There's no question.
You
about
get
I
to
agree
know the
with you.
people just by the photos and the stories and the humor.
Right. Thank you so much for being here.
it. Oh, it's my pleasure. I enjoyed it very much.
We did too.
Yeah, no, we know Scott Crass is started here, little 5-year-old reading this book from
Love this
Madeline,
story.
Yeah.
Madeline, and 1979 gets out there, and then how many years later? 3 volumes of these books, and they're available. So you can go to the website again, Statesman and Mischief Maker, Statesman, and we're
Yeah.
having fun, aren't we? Just sharing.
We are
Scott.
having
We're,
fun.
we're loving sharing you with the world because
Yeah,
you've
I'm
shared
enjoying
all
every
these
bit of it.
people, and we want everyone to know about Scott Crass.
Yes, we do. And I totally highly recommend the book because I have been reading. I haven't even finished because there's so many little stories in here. So
Yeah, and I'm taking it on my cruise.
she's
Okay,
taking it
that's
away.
great.
I'm
That's
leaving.
wonderful.
I'm just this my whole entire dedication to this. But I also want everybody to know that again, you are available. There's speaking engagements, college, bookstores, college speaking, to students and everything you want to do.
Right.
And
Very
that's
much so.
and also just other TV appearances and so on.
Right.
I look forward to
Congratulations, Scott.
it. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I
Thanks
look
for
forward to
having me.
hearing some more stories.
I look forward to telling them.
Good.
Congratulations
Cheers.
So
again.
much.
Cheers and congratulations
Thank you.
on your book.
Yep. And thanks for watching Jersey
Cheers to
Talk
you.
Radio. And Scott Crass is the guy to
Right.
watch in the future.
Have a good night.
Have a great night.